Привет, друзья! G'day guys, welcome to another Soviet lens review. Today we're taking a look at one of the most popular 50mm lenses in the Soviet Union. No, it's not the Helios 44, we're going to be checking out the Industar-61 LZ. So, let's get into it. Alrighty, so the Industar-61 LZ. This is the lens that we're going to be checking out today. It is a 50mm f2.8 lens designed and manufactured in the Soviet Union. My copy here made at the Elzos Litcorino plant, which is pretty common. Most of the Industars you'll find in the wild are just like this, the Industar-61 LZ variant. Now, I wanted to review this lens and pick it up because it's got a bit of a reputation amongst former Soviet photographers, and anyone who really uses it will say that this was the go-to 50mm lens in the Soviet Union if you wanted just a standard nifty 50. You know, the Helios 44 was not really used particularly in sort of photojournalism work or any work that required a much more neutral image because of course, the Helios 44's characteristic swirly bokeh. And then you've got the Industar 52, another 50mm option. Unfortunately, that one, it's not really that nice to use. It's got very poor ergonomics. And so what that left a lot of Soviet photographers with was a choice between, well, you know, some lenses that didn't really suit kind of neutral photojournalism or the Industar-61 LZ. And so that is why this lens was chosen quite frequently. And there is quite a lot of kind of reporting and accounts of this lens being the go-to. But today I wanted to find out whether that was a good reason to go to the Industar-61 LZ. You know, it's also known as an extremely sharp lens wide open, and we're going to dive into that with some pretty interesting results later in the video. But first off, a little bit of history about the lens. So to start off with, this lens was produced from 1971 onwards in the Soviet Union. Production finished kind of around the late 80s. My copy here, as you can tell by the serial number, was produced in 1983. And it came in a bunch of different variants. So this was probably the most popular full frame camera variant, the 61 LZ. But it also came in the 61M, the 61 LD, the 61A, came in the rangefinder variants as well. And a word of warning, just quickly, for anyone who's thinking about buying an Industar 61, make sure you do not get the small rangefinder variants because they have a different flange focal distance than these M42 variants. So if you're looking to pick one up, definitely pick up the Industar-61 LZ or maybe even the M. Back onto the history of the lens. This is a Carl Zeiss Tessar based lens. The Carl Zeiss Tessar design incorporates 4 elements in 3 groups in this lens, and it was really known as the eagle eye because it was a very sharp design. And you know, back in the day when the Carl Zeiss Tessar design came out, it wasn't actually that common for lenses when they were wide open to look pretty sharp. And that's what the Carl Zeiss Tessar was known for. It was known for looking sharp. It was known for looking sharp wide open. And I think the Industar-61 LZ, it definitely can claim that it looks pretty sharp wide open, particularly for a lens of its era, you know, made in the early 70s onwards. But that's not all there is to it. So yeah, we'll see how well the Industar-61 performs in terms of sharpness later on. Now, this copy was made at the Litcorino plant. There were copies made across different plants in the Soviet Union, although this lens was originally developed at the State Optical Institute, otherwise known as GOI. And the name of the Industar-61 LZ actually gives a bit of a clue away as to one of the most important features of this lens. So the L in the name there actually stands for lanthanum. It is theorized. And what that refers to is the STK6 super heavy lanthanum crowns that were used, 2 of them as glass elements in this lens. It was the first time that the Soviet Union really used that quite modern for the time optical technology in its lenses, and they wanted to kind of shout about it because it was quite a development, and it allowed for things like increased resolution, as many modern camera manufacturers do today. When you see a modern Nikon zoom, you're going to be able to see on the marketing material how many ultra low dispersion elements it has. Well, the L in the Industar-61 LZ is basically the exact same thing. The Soviets were shouting about their optical technology in this lens. Now the MC, next thing to get to here, this lens was multi-coated. There are some versions which do not say MC, they are still multi-coated. So don't worry if you don't have a version that says MC, it's still going to be multi-coated, and people who have tested it, both of the versions that is, basically everyone kind of comes to the conclusion that there's no real difference in optical quality between the MC and the non-MC marked versions. Now, this lens, onto the construction of it, is 225 grams. It is, of course, all metal and glass, like just about all Soviet lenses. It is a pretty cool construction, and you can see why it was very popular with photographers of the time, because it is just a very usable design. So to start off with, it has an aperture preset mechanism. So to use this, you simply pull down the aperture ring, you twist it to whatever you want to set the kind of aperture lock to, you let go, and then if you've done it correctly, it is a little bit tricky the first time to do it, but then when you've done it correctly, the aperture will actually stop at that value. So it can be pretty useful, particularly in film photography, but I think for modern digital cameras, the only real use I've found for the aperture preset mechanism is making sure that I don't accidentally stop down to f16 when I'm, maybe taking a landscape or something like that, because I don't want the effects of diffraction in my shot coming through too strongly. Now, it has a 6-bladed aperture as well. Now, this aperture forms some pretty interesting bokeh, kind of like hexagonal sort of stars almost, but we'll get into that later. And this is really the go-to lens for Soviet photographers if they needed to shoot macro back in the day as well, at least before the Volna 9 came out, because this lens can by default achieve a magnification ratio of 1 to 2.1, a macro ratio, but if you flip it and put it on your camera inverse, then that will allow it to achieve a 1:1 macro ratio, which is pretty good, and officially, macro. I've used this with a couple of macro rings because I don't have an inverter ring, same sort of effect, and yeah, it's a pretty good macro lens, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, the minimum focusing distance is a little bit under 30 centimeters. The filter thread at the top there is 49 millimeters. You do get, if you purchase it as a full set, you should get a 49 millimeter UV filter in the kit. I got one with mine, and I actually ran some pretty interesting tests with this UV filter that you're going to want to pay attention to later in the video, that impacts sharpness in a way that you might not think. But yeah, it's a really nice lens to use between the aperture, between the focusing system. Ergonomically, this is a fantastic lens. Moving on to kind of photo characteristics, the ergonomics actually affect the photo characteristics as well, because the glass elements in this lens are set back so that it's actually almost got its own inbuilt lens hood, and you can kind of see that there, where there's a good kind of 4 centimeters or so of space between the glass element and the front of the lens. Now, it also comes with a cap like this, which is just a slip-on cap. Get yourself a better one. They're not very good, please. I need to order one myself from China or something like that on eBay. And then rounding out the technical specs, this was spec'd on paper to have a 42/30 lines per millimeter resolving power in the center and the edges of the frame. And for those of you who don't know your Soviet lenses lines per millimeter, that's pretty good. 42 and 30, particularly the 30 side of things on the edges of the frame, is pretty high up there, but doesn't actually paint the whole picture. Light transmittance coefficient of this lens was 0.85, which basically means that when you're shooting this at 2.8, you're going to get pretty much as much light as you expect at f2.8. It's not going to be too much darker like the Mir 10A that I'm shooting on today, which has a light transmittance coefficient of around 0.71 or 0.72 or something like that, which effectively means it's got a lower t-stop. Even when the aperture stays the same value. But yeah, there you go. So that is the kind of technical and ergonomic characteristics of the Industar-61 LZ. But I've been shooting this lens for a couple of weeks now, so why don't we jump into some photos? Okay guys, so first off, let's take a look at the sharpness, some sharpness tests of the Industar-61 LZ. I've got my standard test chart here and I'm comparing an f2.8 shot, starting off with an f4 shot. So we're going to be going down the apertures. As you can see, right in the center from f2.8, the Industar-61 LZ is sharp. There is a lot of resolving power there. It is not having any issues practically whatsoever. And even in comparison to f4, the center stays pretty much the same. But the corners are where the Industar-61 LZ does have some issues. At f2.8 here, as you can see on the left, it's not resolving very well, particularly as you get out to those extreme corners. You know, towards the corners, it's kind of fine, but as you can see, the resolution does start to drop a bit there, and stopping it down to f4 does not really help. But let's go ahead and compare this to f5.6, see if that is any better. And as you can see, yes, so f5.6, it does get a little bit better. And what you'll find is that by f5.6 as well, vignette has pretty much dropped to 0. This lens doesn't have much vignetting anyway, but yeah, it's pretty much gone by f5.6. Next up, let's compare it to f11, skip through f8, and as you can see there, the corners are just continuously improving. f2.8 on the left, f11 on the right, and the center really, it's really not that much sharper from f2.8 through to f11. By f16, of course, we do see the effects of diffraction sort of starting to kick in, but also sort of not. The corners are still sharper at f16. So really quickly, I also wanted to jump in and show the sharpness of the Industar-61 LZ with and without the included UV filter. Now you might just think that the UV filter by default is just going to crush the image quality, and it doesn't really do that. So we've got the unfiltered lens on the left, the filter on the right. Now this is at f2.8, and you can definitely see on the filtered version, yes, at f2.8, the filter is degrading the image quality. Even in the center there, it's just not as sharp. But if we go ahead and compare, let's go ahead and compare f11 here for the unfiltered version and compare it again to f11 for the filtered version. There we go. And what you're actually going to see is that the filtered Industar at f11 really does not suffer whatsoever from the effects of the filter. The filter doesn't really hurt it at all. And you can actually even see a little bit of fringing in the unfiltered Industar that's not quite so prevalent, or at least a different color in the filtered version. And again, on this filtered version on the right there, you know, there's a lot of resolution. You're not missing out on anything compared to the unfiltered on the left. So, you know, that was pretty interesting. And you are going to see this in these upcoming tests. Now, what I've done is I've plotted these results into a custom program I wrote, which spits out a sharpness value, very similar to modern focus peaking algorithms. And what we can see here is very interesting. The Industar-61 LZ has an almost linear increase in its sharpness as you stop that aperture down, which isn't actually too typical. And what's interesting as well is that f16, it doesn't really suffer too much from diffraction, which is great, of course, for macro. But here is where it gets super intriguing, because the UV filter really doesn't impact image quality too much. You'll see at f2.8, yes, it is softer. f4, it basically catches up. And from f5.6 onwards, using the UV filter on the Industar-61 LZ will not lose you any image quality at all. Okay guys, here we are. We are in 0-in-1 Photo Raw, and we're gonna take a look at a few photos I've edited. Some I haven't edited from the Industar-61 LZ. First up, this photo of some beautiful pizza here. And I think I love this one just because it shows you what the Industar-61 LZ can do. If we zoom into the center of the frame here, it is nice and sharp. And, look, not maybe perfectly sharp, not as sharp as a modern lens, but if you zoom out, and particularly noting that this photo was taken at around ISO 1000, this is a really nice looking image. Lots of contrast, and the bokeh, distracting, but I kind of quite like it in the corner there as well. Now on to something a little bit more macro. Here we are, we've got the B. This is with a macro ring added on. As you can see, the bits of the B that are in focus are nice and sharp. This is not easy to get. I took about 200 photos of this B before landing on this one, but yeah, you can see that, overall it's a pretty sharp lens, and you can get close enough for macro. When you are in macro, I kind of like the artistic effect that the 6-bladed aperture gives to the Industar-61 LZ as well. And here we are, went down to a NIDOC week presentation down at my local town hall, and I took a few photos similar to how a journalist might do, to record some happenings here. And this is just a nice example of showing the kind of bokeh in the background of the Industar-61 LZ. This is a complex background, lots of kind of dots and stuff like that, but the bokeh is handling it well, very neutral colors. Another photo as well showing the bokeh looking pretty good, but let's go ahead and skip to one of my favorites, which is this one here, which has the smoke, it has a bokeh in the background, it has this nice, quite sharp subject in the center of the frame. Again, this is shot at f2.8, and there's just a lot of contrast here, a lot of detail, but still some pleasing neutral tones. Here, nice little scooter. I really liked the kind of tone fall off in the way that the sun was hitting the pavement there. Thought that was pretty nice. And again, some flowers just to show you what flowers look like on the Industar-61 LZ. Relatively sharp in the middle there, not sort of razor sharp. I might have misfocused by like a millimeter there, but overall, again, you can tell that there's no real issues with contrast in this lens. That's straight out of camera, as is this photo. Love the photo of the nice bright silver beats there, and this is again straight out of camera, no sharpness or anything like that applied. So you can see that, zooming into 100%, it's a touch not razor sharp there, but I just love the colors that the Industar produces. And here we are. This is more of a look. I've applied a kind of film simulation on this photo here, and I really like the way that the Industar shows up with a bit of film grain, because as soon as you put that film grain on it, it really does become the limiting factor in terms of the resolution, the grain that is, not the lens. So you can see how, back in film days, this was seen as a very sharp lens. And again, a bit of street photography here next up. So I've got some nice olives there, and I just love the blues in this picture. You're going to get some very nice blues out of the Industar, I found. I think it just does blues really, really well, which may be due to its kind of color formula. But again, a bit of graffiti here through some fences, which shows the near depth of field, the near bokeh of the Industar, which is, pretty nice. And this, I absolutely love this shot. I don't know why, but I think it's just because of the tones in this metal that the Industar has picked up. If we zoom in here, you can see beautiful and sharp, even though this is pretty close to the corner of the frame. And just the metal here just looks amazing as I zoom out. And even the fall off to the out of focus areas is looking really, really good. There is no longitudinal chromatic aberration whatsoever in this photo. I know it's not much, but I love it. And again, here playing with a few film looks, a bit of steak, like the kind of smoke there. Got some more graffiti. This is a great example of just how sharp the Industar is. Bang in into the center, and you're not going to be complaining about the sharpness there. If we go right to the corners, you're starting to see in the very edges there is a drop in sharpness still, even though this is shot at around f8, f11. But I think when you're viewing this photo at the intended resolution, which is full screen here, this is a sharp looking photo.
Let's go through here again. Good for food as well. You can see the bokeh fall off is looking pretty nice. Nice bit of 3D pop from the Industar as well. This one is an example of the Industar taking a portrait, and I don't mind the Industar for portraits. I definitely don't think it's too sharp. The colors that come out of it are fairly neutral, and the bokeh here, as we can see, is nice and I don't know, a bit artistic with those stars. So yeah, I like it. Now, next onto some potential issues with the lens, or, well, let's just have a look at them. So this one is shot at f2.8 directly into the sun. You can see there is a very, very small amount of, not ghosting, but kind of slight chromatic aberration. They're fringing towards those very bright highlights. If we flip over to this next shot that's shot at f11, it's still sort of there, but you can see the whole image has sharpened up a little bit. The sun stars are not that impressive from the Industar here, even at f11. Really not a lens that you want to use for sun stars. Next up, again, a more formal test of longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is the shift in colors in the near and far field out of focus areas. As you can see here, there is really no longitudinal chromatic aberration to speak of. Industar gets a A+ in that regard. Next up, this is what happens when you get light anywhere in your frame or to the side of your frame. Strong light is just going to ruin it. The Industar, even though it's multi-coated, hates backlighting. It hates having, the sun in the side of it. And as you can see, everything is just completely ruined here. It does not look good. And here, I think this is another good example because it shows the differences between f2.8 and f11. Let's go ahead and zoom into this building here and take a look at what it's looking like at f2.8. As you can hopefully see there on YouTube, not super razor sharp. It's really wanting to become sharp, but it's not quite yet. But then we flick over to f11 and there's a lot more definition in these lines here. Just everything looks just that tiny bit sharper, which is what you're going to get with the Industar. And another example of the flare there, not looking too good. But finally, my favorite shot of the bunch, I think this just shows you what the Industar is capable of. It is going to produce some beautiful colors. It's going to be able to get some beautiful contrast in the frame. Even this like super white cauliflower, contrasted with a super dark background behind it. It has no issues with fringing there. And really captures a lot of detail in all of these vegetables. I love this shot.
So guys, there we go, the Industar-61 LZ. It is potentially not all that it's cracked up to be in terms of sharpness, but it still delivers a very usable image on today's modern digital cameras. Look, I think if you're picking one of these up, it's one to pick up for the fun of it. It's a really ergonomic lens and it does create some nice contrasty, relatively sharp pictures. But I think we've busted the myth today that this is for somehow the Soviet Union's sharpest lens. It is definitely not. So keep that in mind if you're buying yourself an Industar-61 LZ, or if you might be. But there we go, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, subscribe to Soviet Lens Reviews on YouTube for more content just like this. Love it if you'd hit the subscribe button, and why not give the video a like as well, or leave me a comment. Let me know if you have any questions about Soviet lenses, anything along those lines. But until the next time, I'll see you then.